Hej alle sammen, og velkommen til episode nummer 25 af Verbos podcast. Mit navn er Kasper Junge, og jeg er machine learning engineer hos SEO.ai.
Og jeg hedder Jonas Høgh Kyss Andersen og arbejder som data scientist på Ekstrabladet.
Yes, og i dag skal vi snakke om noget rigtig spændende, fordi vi skal nemlig snakke om large language models i produktion. Og til at hjælpe os med at snakke om det, har vi nemlig fået Duarte Carmo i studiet, som er freelance machine learning / software engineer. Og Duarte, han er fra Portugal, men har boet i Danmark her i 7 år, men derfor så kommer det her afsnit altså til at blive på engelsk, og det kommer til at blive vores første episode på engelsk, så jeg kommer til lige hurtigt skifte over på engelsk, så jeg lige kan sige hej til Duarte. Hello Duarte. Hello Duarte. Come
Hi Kasper.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so and actually I was very worried about this transition I just made from Danish to English, and
super smooth. I wouldn't have done smoother.
No, but actually now I don't feel like going back, because then I just have to make it another transition. So yeah, but welcome Duarte. Very nice that you wanted to join. Yeah, so I just told before in Danish about you, a little bit about you, but we would like to hear more about you just in a minute. But before we start, I just wanted to briefly explain what we're going to talk about in the episode. The kind of like overall headline is large language models in production, where you have kind of like, before we started talking together, I was stumbled upon your blog. You have a blog, and they have made a blog post called Large Language Models in Production, Lessons Learned. And I really thought it was a super nice blog post, and I thought that we could build the episode up around this blog post and kind of like go through the points and you have. So yes, but before we dive in, Duarte, tell a little bit about yourself and yeah.
All right, thanks a lot for having me, Kasper and Jonas. It's really a pleasure to be here. First of all, I wanted to apologize for my lack of Danish. I've been here for 7 years, so I should know better. But yeah, in IT and technology, it's really hard to get by without. It's really easy to get by without any Danish. So yeah, apologies for that, and really appreciate you guys kind of making this in English as well. So a little bit about me. I'm Duarte. I'm originally from Portugal, Lisbon. I've been in Denmark, living here for about 7 years. I did my master's degree at DTU. Then I worked at Jabra, the headphone company, for a while, working like strategy, product management, and it got more and more nerdy as the years went by. I really figured out that I was coding in positions that I shouldn't really be coding, but there I was. And so I got more and more into technology. Also, did around consulting, around BCG. Boston Consulting Group, was there for a while, then eventually started working with companies kind of solving really tough problems. That's what I like to solve. So really solving like challenging problems like end to end. So normally companies come to me with like a really tough problem they want to solve, and I try to kind of take them through the whole spectrum to solve it. And yeah, that involves a mix of the software side, the machine learning side, the infrastructure side, but also the most important side, which is the people side. So that's why I try not to neglect. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Other than that, I run marathons. That's something I like to do, and I write for my blog basically.
Yeah, and I could really recommend all the listeners your blog. It's very nice. I've been reading a couple of your blog posts, and I've really been enjoying it. So
thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah. So you said Jabra? That's the headphone company?
Yeah,
so
GM,
Okay.
I had a Jabra headset once.
Oh,
yeah,
really? Yeah, it was like a small headset, and it was gold plated.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I think I got it from someone. I can't remember actually. It was a gift.
Yeah. Here in Denmark, you guys, it's not the only headphone company you guys have. I think audio and all that side is really big here. I even have still a lot of friends that are at Jabra, and it's a massive industry. Not only like the hearing aids, but also like the audio side. Like you have Bang & Olufsen and all of those, right?
Yeah,
so you guys,
Denmark is huge in audio.
Yeah, you guys are incredible on that side.
I also worked at for 1 year at Oticon, if you know.
Nice.
Oticon. Yeah.
Nice. Yes, of course. Yeah. How could I not?
So did you work? I'm just curious. Before we start, did you work with kind of like the signal processing side of it, or was it like the software?
Yeah, good question. So I actually started at Jabra as a student assistant in the strategy department. So I did a mix of like machine learning and management at DTU. I chose DTU because it let me do whatever courses I wanted, right? So they had this idea of study lines, but I said, I'm not going to do any of those study lines, and I'm just going to do like hardcore programming, machine learning, all that stuff. And then I got a position as in Jabra in strategy, because I was really good at headphones, because I used to read all of the technology websites all the time. So I knew the names of all of them. And so I was really, really deep into the tech. So I could also help them kind of get an idea of how the other companies are looking at Jabra from the outside, and what our competitors are doing, and things like that. So that's where I got in, actually.
Okay,
that sounds so cool.
And then I started programming, like, automation tools around strategy, like sending emails to different executives to give them alerts of where things were happening. So I was really like getting nerdy. I'm the type of guy that even at BCG I had the Vim bindings on my slides. So it was HJKL to kind of align things. I was one of the, not a lot of people made slides about, Red Hat Linux and stuff like that, and mainframes, but yeah, I was that guy.
Yeah, it can almost be addicting to kind of like automate stuff and, geek out on.
Yeah, it's the classic. You take longer to automate it than to actually do it repeatedly. It's the classic.
I already feel so noobish right now, because I'm still stuck on VS Code, and I have almost no bindings, and I always go into the command thing and type what I'm looking for, and it's just awful. Every time I do it, I feel ashamed of myself.
I mean, no noobie at all. I mean, for me, it's like the tool is part of it. If I know a lot of people that are much more efficient than me using VS Code, right? I just got used to it, and it's really hard to go back. Even though I try to go back to VS Code and test it, because it's really like good on a lot of things, I just end up always coming back to NeoVim, unfortunately.
Yeah,
that's cool. We should have a session on NeoVim one day.
Yeah.
Great, but let's jump into the blog post and kind of like talk a little bit about the large language models in production, because the past, like the recent year, have just been like the LLM year, I guess you can say. Really, like it's really just exploded, crazy.
I mean. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, I mean, about the post, I think we've just seen an explosion.
Yeah, could you maybe just tell a little bit about the background for the blog post?
Of course. So I basically there was a big boom, like GPT and OpenAI started putting out stuff, right? And everyone started getting excited, and we've been at it for the past year. And not slowly, I was working for a lot of like startups at the time, and there was very, very we had to adopt all of these technologies really fast, because the use case where I was working was very prone to large language models, and we'll get into why. And so I was doing a lot of things that were very new, and then I thought that always like there was a lot of hype around it, and even my uncle was like asking me things about OpenAI and GPT.
Because that's the funny thing. You started the blog post off by saying like a year ago nobody knew what I was doing, nobody asked what I was doing. Suddenly switching to now, everybody's like, oh, all that AI, right?
Yeah, it still happens to me all the time. Like a couple of years ago, I was like, how about you do it? Like, I mean, like machine learning and AI, and people like, yeah, what is that? And I'm like,
exactly.
Nowadays I say like, oh yeah, I do like AI and software and stuff like that, and people are like, oh AI, great, incredible. And I was like, oh, now you know what it is. And I mean, like, so that's normally a good indicator that you're in a bubble. But so that's why I started the blog post of like, I don't know why everyone is asking me this. Maybe we're in a bubble or not. Let's like, and normally with all of these bubbles, I always do the same thing. I also have a blog post about NFTs where everyone was talking about NFTs. I'm like, okay, let me build an NFT from scratch. What is this really about? And like, only when I do that, I can really get an idea of what is it really, right?
Wow, that's a great way of exploring things. Let's build it. And
yeah, exactly, because the other people that are doing like the hype, right? There's a lot of people talking about the technologies, but who are the people that are really getting their hands dirty? And I only think when you get your hands dirty and you realize that NFTs were built with a bunch of any NPM packages that you have no clue where they come about. Now, large language models are built in something that I feel like it's a little bit more grounded and more realistic. But there's a big tendency that, of course, of saying that GPT and AI will solve everything. And that's not the case. And that's what I also wanted to come forward with.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so what do you think about, you also kind of like begin the blog post with the kind of like talking about hype versus reality. How do you feel about that thing? Now we're almost a year in, right? So maybe we could say something about it at least.
Yeah, I think for sure in the hype versus reality, I think I'm not a great person to make predictions, right? And I don't want to make predictions, but I've seen a lot of these use cases materialize really well. So actually delivering value as well. But I also see that, you know what I mean? Like when a lot of venture capital starts throwing money at all of these things, it's eventual that a lot of these things will work. But we don't see the failures. We only see the things that are going well. And so I cannot point you out to, hey, like, look at this AI use case that completely failed. It's really hard to get at because people only surface the things that are really, really working well. And so I don't know if where we are in the hype, the hype, like the Gartner hype cycle, right? I guess we're somewhere down there. There will probably be some sort of a loom of like things not being delivered, and then we'll stabilize around a good, nice, and productive use case, I guess.
It's funny because I feel like we're a little. I think I thought during the summer that we were in the kind of like the dip.
Okay.
But it seemed like it was more because like people were kind of like on vacation and holiday stuff like that. Because I think now it has kind of like accelerated again after the summer vacation.
Yeah, but recently, actually, sorry for interrupting, but recently I saw Andrew Ng, you know this famous guy with Coursera. Yeah, he had a talk where he talked about and gave some examples of companies that were on the hype and they grew very, very fast, and then they just plummeted. And some of the things that they produced from LLMs was basically just like a shallow interface over on top of the technology that was already innovated. That was his point. And he compared it to when the iPhone came out and someone made like an app for turning on the flashlight. And it was, I can't remember, it sold for X amount of dollars, right? Until it was just basically reproduced. So because it was so easy to reproduce, it was not worth anything because the innovation was already there behind that, little GUI or whatever someone made. Yeah. And I think that we are seeing a lot of like applications that are too shallow in terms of the technology that's underlying, and so they will just fall because it's too easy to replicate.
It's a great way of looking at it.
Because if you're like a startup in this space, you should be worried about like how relevant am I in just half a year, like maybe even, and it's really crucial to kind of like think about, okay, how can I build something that is proprietary, that I have, so I'm not just a shallow thing around the OpenAI,
around an API.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think there's companies like Jasper AI, for example, all the sales side of things as well, that are basically APIs, like wrappers around an API, and that's one of the things I also talk about is the fact that you should be prepared for the future.
Yeah, exactly, which is a really good point.
Yeah, but also like the fact is that you need to provide some value, right? And if your wrapper, like you're saying, Jonas, is just a thin wrapper around OpenAI, then you better be sure that your interface is incredible and like your experience is incredible, right? Like if you're not providing anything on top, then like those applications would most likely fail. And you have guys like Jasper AI, like this sales GPT thing that also had to do a bunch of layoffs, and you know what I mean? Like, so I completely agree with your point, Jonas. I think it's a great comparison.
Yeah. Not my point. I just took it from Andrew,
The point that you brought here.
he's the one to credit, but I thought it was really, really spot on, right? I probably had the thought myself, but didn't formulate it that way. And but I've also seen this at my own work that you have this tendency to we need the same thing that they have out there. Yeah, we need this interface. We just want the same as this interface because we can't use OpenAI's interface because it's not private enough, or it's not compliant or something like that. And then everybody wants to build these small private GPTs and God knows what, right? And I mean, we'll make them because the companies need this kind of privacy or whatever it is, or maybe they need to plug OpenAI with Bard instead, and it's nice to have like an adapter between that and so on. Okay, that's fair enough, but where's the value? That's the question. Yeah, I agree. So compliance is not like value really; it's just compliance.
I agree.
Yeah.
So so the next kind of like point in the blog post is like know your use case, right? And there you talk about two things you can use large language models for, which I very much agree with, and it's a very useful kind of like a distinction to make in order to think what you can use these things for, right? And that is generative tasks. Like you want to generate an email, for example, you want to generate something, and then there's the kind of like predictive tasks. So and I just really I feel like that's a very useful thing, like way to think about it.
So my point was that a lot of times in classical machine learning, before all of this LLM thing happened, a lot of the algorithms that I used to produce are algorithms that, given an input, will classify into a certain thing, right? Yeah. It's a classifier, or it's some sort of like algorithm that is a time series algorithm. So I call those predictive tasks. So given an input, you give a very deterministic output. I would like to classify, or I would like to regress, or I would like to give a label to some sort of text. And that's one type of categories. And of course, some of those can be solved by traditional machine learning algorithms or even LLMs nowadays. And the other very different, in my opinion, use case is the generative use case, where your goal is to draw a picture given a sentence, or your goal is to write an article given a prompt. But that's a completely different game and goal also than what we had before. Like before all of this revolution, we were not at least I was not working in algorithms that their main use case was to generate new things. The main use case was to take decisions based on things that exist. You know what I mean? And so what I mean here is that GPT and OpenAI is really great for generating things, generative tasks. And of course, there are ways of using OpenAI and GPT for like predictive tasks, right? You can use OpenAI's functions, or you can fine tune something smaller. But I guess where GPT really excels is in generative tasks. So being generative, right? So know your use case is about, okay, are you going to generate something? Then yes, if you're generating, then go for LLMs. That should be your main goal. But if you're trying to do a prediction, so if your goal is to classify reviews, or if your goal is to, tweets is happy or sad, or whatever goal is, like LLMs should not be your first thing that you jump to. No, that's what I mean.
Exactly. Yeah. But I also feel,
Actually, I'm gonna push a little bit back here, because I completely agree that we sometimes have this like, now we have a universal hammer. Oh my God, we could just use it for everything. And then you have an application and you want to implement this in some kind of like engineering fashion. And engineers hate when things take more than some milliseconds, right?
Yes.
And let's just put it out there. These motherfucking big models, sorry for all of you kids out there, they are so fucking slow, and they are huge. And they, when you want to predict like 3 labels, I feel like it's like you're putting something too big to the task. But Casper had one really good point the other day, that in terms of resources, what it takes to prototype some classification and actually test it in some kind of production environment and show it and see, is this data or classification worth anything? You can be really, really fast up and running with a generative solution.
Oh, I completely agree. I think you're not. I think you're not pushing back.
So okay, I'm not pushing back, but you see that there's like a 2-step thing these days. You go to the generative solution first to like prototype, and you could do it really fast, like in a couple of hours. You show something to somebody and they say, okay, we could try that, and maybe you can go a little bit further and then have prototyping in production environment kind of thing. And you can like in a week you could have this tested and A/B tested and everything, if you have a great setup. So I think there's something new to the table in this area, but of course we need to say to ourselves, we can't stay with the solution because it's expensive. So That's just.
But I think
I've seen too many prototypes in production. I think when I work with engineers, I don't know about you, Jonas, maybe your teams are probably much smarter than the way I work. But normally, whenever we build a prototype and a demo, that's normally what ships out to production. I don't think I don't think engineers are really like, oh no, wait, now we're gonna take a step back and we're gonna train a classifier in this. You know what I mean? Like whatever we prototype ends up in production. But I so agree with your point that, and I think I talked a little bit about it in the conclusion, is that this is a hammer, a very big hammer. And when you have a big hammer, everything looks like a nail. But I can also talk about a specific use case where I used it, where we had a very simple task, which is we have 5 sentences and we want to figure out which one of these 5 sentences is most similar to a target sentence. And the first thing that my team told me at the time was, hey, Duarte, you can just use GPT for this, right? We ask, here's 5 sentences, which one is the closest? And I was like, yeah, but why would you? Like, we could also just embed these sentences using sentence transformers that has been out for years now, 5 or more, embed them, do cosine similarity, and boom, you have the best one. And they didn't really believe me. And they made me test it out and actually prove to them. So I built an Excel where I actually had sentence transformers that just encoded cosine similarity. And then I did GPT 3.5 and GPT 4 and compared them. And GPT 3.5 and 4 was 5% better, but it was 3 times slower and 5 times more expensive to operate. And that was a no-brainer.
but that's a really great point you're making there, because a lot of people can suddenly understand, like, okay, every what's used to be kind of like a little complex and like technical machine learning solution, natural language processing solution. A lot of people can now actually think about it in terms of prompting ChatGPT, for example. They think, you could just like make ChatGPT do this, right? But it's like, for some use cases, it is really not the optimal solution. For example, what you're saying here, it's way more obvious to, or at least way more efficient to use some kind of embedding, for example. Also, for example, if you have like 1 million sentences that you have to compare it to, you don't run an LLM.
It's going to be an expensive prompt. But yeah, it's like it's slower, it's more expensive, and it's perhaps a little bit less predictable as well. And then like when the API might go down, and that also comes the case of you, Jonas, saying like that you build this shell around the API. Like, I'm only going to use that API when what I need to do is some sort of generative task that is the ultimate value that I'm providing the business. And they were like, okay, Duarte, you win this one. We'll see when GPT-5 comes out. And I'm like, okay.
But I really love that story, because I'm a huge fan of embeddings. Let's just put it out there. I love embeddings. They are so versatile. They can be used for all kinds of things. They are completely undervalued. I love vector databases, which should be named search engines or vector and search, whatever, not databases. But because, I mean, you can, so when you, as you said, with the sentence transformers, you can basically take that, the embeddings, and you can apply a classical machine learning on top of that and do stuff with it, like have a really good classifier from that, Jonas, from those embeddings,
and better, and it runs on the CPU, and it's much faster, and you don't have to pay every time you call it. It's not down. There's no HTTP APIs. You can run unit tests on it. There's a lot of advantages, right? And you don't even need to use OpenAI's embeddings. You can use. So this is what I mean, right? Like you know your use case. If your use case is really about predicting something, then
But so I totally agree with that. I mean, scikit-learn is still there. You can take it down and use it. Still, you don't have to leave scikit-learn.
But actually, I have another point which I think is also important to emphasize, because I am really guilty of choosing a way too complex model for solving some task when I could have been using a way simpler one, right? Let me give an example. For example, I want to use some text classification problem. I choose some BERT transformer encoder style model, right? Because that's what I know, because I went straight to deep learning when I learned about machine learning, right? But oftentimes I could have done just as good with you know, a TF IDF classifier, for example, using scikit-learn. So, and that's a case where I think, you know, it's a very good idea to always try the simplest solution first to see how far I can get, and then go up, right? But actually, and then, you know, following that logic, it would be stupid to kind of like start out a classifying problem with large language models. But actually, you know, I think that a workflow I think is going to be big in the future, and that I'm already kind of like seeing myself do, is kind of like actually starting with the large language model to kind of like just write some initial prompt.
Data sets.
Yeah, just, you know, write some initial prompt, run it on a bunch of data, and kind of like almost actually go like approach it like an active learning problem, sort of, and then go through the examples and kind of like figure out like how. Because also when you kind of like start wanting to build a classifier, you think you know the problem and you think you know how the data should be annotated, but when you then run it like as an instruction to a large language models, and you know, just see it, you start to realize that there was a lot of edge cases that you did not think of, and where you were not very specific in, you know, the prompt that you gave, right? So I think, you know, data set generation for classification problems, but also like for text generation problems, it seems, you know, textbooks is all you need, the papers and stuff like this. It seems like it's generating data sets is going to be a huge thing, and a big part of, you know, a big productivity boost for the whole machine learning, at least NLP framework.
I think I completely agree with that point. I think leverage them to create data sets. I think it's a great way of going about it. And then when you realize that things are going to get expensive and you get popular, then go back to the simple ones.
And the funny thing is, you can also you can actually just you can actually make, you know, the large language model annotate the data set.
Yeah,
fit
exactly.
a smaller model on it, right, and then just extract.
Yeah, that's normally what I would advise. But I also know that, like I told Jonas, like normally if we start complicated, we're going to get complicated. If we start simple, but you know, like using GPT to create your own data set and then annotating, taking the embeddings or doing whatever and doing something small. I prefer to put things that are small in production. But yeah, I think we all agree here that know your use case. And one thing that these are really good at is generative things, and we didn't really have those before, and that's clear.
Yeah. So that's a completely new tool in the toolbox,
exactly,
right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Great,
next up,
great.
Next up, you talk about determinism, like deterministic versus stochastic, and that's also a very interesting one. Also, kind of like relating to the predictive task and the generative tasks. They're
what
very
close.
Thoughts about
Right?
that?
Yeah. I mean, for me, when I was used to working in machine learning, like a lot of machine learning problems and a lot of machine learning problems, I would say are more of the deterministic nature. And this, by this I mean that given an input, your model will always give an output. Now, this has several edge cases that might not always be the case, but I'm used to doing models and also running unit tests and like data tests on those models. So whenever I deploy a model, I know what I can expect from that model. And if someone asks, hey, Duarte, why did this transformer predict that? I can analyze like a gradient analyzer on it, and I can know exactly what sparked that prediction. Now, and that's something we have. We also have tools like Shape and tools like game theory tools to really analyze the output of these models and figuring out why are they predicting certain things. So I think the story of like the machine learning black box, of course, it appears if you're doing, you know, a UNet segmentation model with an efficient net pre-trained backbone. Okay, but if you're doing something like clearer or more straightforward, you can explain why certain things are happening. Now, in the case of GPT, and I feel like it's a little more stochastic. Of course, you have things like temperature that you can play around it, but whenever you're prompting these models, you're going to get something that or you're not expecting or that you wouldn't really see. And I think there's been a lot of involvement in, I don't know, I wrote this, 3 or 4 months ago. I think there's already been some developments in terms of eval modes and tools that you can actually use to test your large language model. But in its pure form, it's something that is a lot more stochastic and throws a lot more curveballs at you that you don't know. Like, I have several stories of something like, for example, we had a model that was basically generating emails. mostly like sales focused emails, and it will analyze the profile of a certain person, and it will generate an email to basically try to sell something to that person. And the model was great, and people were super happy with it, and business was booming, and everything was going well. But once the model wrote an email in Spanish, and we were like, what the hell happened? Why is this model, why is GPT outputting things in Spanish now? And we realized that the profile of that person was actually written in Spanish. And so GPT had seen that in Spanish and output an email in Spanish. And so there's a bunch of these little things of, okay, great, that time it
but that
failed.
was a great thing, I guess.
That was a great thing, right?
Yeah,
but it also happened to a lot of bad things, like things that, no, you shouldn't really talk about this specific thing in the email, or you shouldn't really mention that thing, that's a little bit inappropriate. So a lot of those use cases also popped out. And so it's really hard to kind of put guardrails around that, but you have to be prepared for the stochastic nature of these things. And so you better be careful how you're really kind of wrapping these things around the API so that you don't say anything that you like your business's reputation depends on.
Yeah, that's basically what everyone is really afraid of, letting these things loose in their product, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like you put it in a support bot, right? Like everything can go really well, and you have tools like guardrails, I think, from Daniel Whitenack that kind of help you, right? But at what cost? Where are you going to send this data to? How much latency are you going to get, right? But I think we also need to learn how to deal with the stochastic nature of these things.
How are you experiencing this at Ekstrablad, Jonas?
Well, my colleague Tore has some great stories for when Da Vinci was writing. It was basically told to summarize, business reports of, given this report, please give a factual summary of what's up and down in this, and sometimes like really small. I mean, this is not something we would see in chat version today because it's the old Instruct Da Vinci model that's very much more prone to small token variations. But he would basically see sometimes that if he forgot or for some reason that the report wasn't quoted, or like, so it seemed like it was supposed to just continue the context, it was basically just making up more to the report instead of giving the summary.
Oh my god.
And you can also imagine that because the instruction is on the top, like summarize this, it basically came out of attentive space, so it was too far away, and it just continued the report. So that's kind of like a funny thing. So that's something that he has observed. But we always have this human in the loop. And I was actually to say, Duarte, that your case with the emails is like high stake generative task. I mean, wow. I wouldn't dare put that out there.
So I mean, in this particular case, it was more like sales emails. So normally, like what I also mentioned is exactly what you mentioned, Jonas, that the cost of failure in certain cases is low, but the cost of failure in other cases is really high. And so if the cost of failure is low, I guess you can neglect it a little bit. But if the cost of failure is high, example, you're in a medical scenario, or like you're doing a financial report when you need to be factual, then you better guarantee that that's right? So I agree with you. Like it's the cost of, what is your cost of failure? Is it bad or is it okay?
And I think that this space where you evaluate the generative output is not really, it's not really well, like in the toolings around it, there's a lack of tooling around that. I think we have to see.
And do you want to run APIs for testing, right? I mean, do you really want to run unit tests or whatever tests? Are you going to spend API tokens to do unit tests? Because I guess some companies are.
Yeah,
but
there's some companies are doing the expensive reprompting thing where you just tell GPT-4 that, are you really sure that you got this right? Yeah,
think step by step.
That it's really expensive if you do it that way, right? So sometimes maybe you want to bring some other tools into the game, for instance, embeddings, and you can sort of like. We do something actually where we embed like on a sentence level and we check that against the generated stuff. So we have sort of like not a ground truth, but part of the prompt is being checked against what's being produced. So you have like a sanity check for it, because you can sort of like say, okay, if there's no high match in this cosine distance of these matrices, then there's something wrong, right? So you can do that kind of like case knockout, and then you say, okay, let's do this again. But it's really like minimal things you can do at the moment. And so
we do a bunch of heuristics. So we actually check, okay, whatever the user and whatever input to the model, it needs to pass a bunch of business rules and a bunch of like keyword matchings, and whatever token is generating or streamed, all of those are checked to just really ensure that nothing that we weren't expecting comes out. But we didn't have a rule for if you write an email in French or in Spanish.
Exactly.
That's a tough one, because a multilingual embedding will be close enough as well.
Yeah.
I want to just sorry. Just before, because we on the topic of deterministic and stochastic, I actually have a bit of like a question, because when I read your this part of your post, I was like, but I always thought about LLMs as being quite deterministic, actually, because I mean, you have your weights and they are kind of like constant. So if you have given these tokens, and then I should when I do the next token prediction, I should have a ranking of tokens that's pretty deterministic, right? There's nothing. And next time I give it the same tokens, the ranking of those predicted tokens should be the same before I do any kind of like beam search over more than one token, softmax, yada yada, all that. So the non-deterministic nature of it, isn't it part of the actual search for a longer, like an optimized probability over more sentences? Wouldn't you say that's where it comes in?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I think that's where it comes in. I think it's the classical top K, top P dance, beam searching, right? So you have all of the tokens, and you have like a probability curve of one of those tokens, and then you have the actual like the tree of different tokens that are possible, and it finds out which path it wants to take. And I think, I'm not completely sure if we set the temperature to a certain thing, that we could also always predict the same, but inherently, these things are a little bit more stochastic, as I like to say. But I agree that we could potentially fix all of this and kind of get the same output, I believe.
Yeah, but that would probably also be a dumb solution, right? Like Casper said, we just looked at the equations just a little bit, from your links. What is the temperature actually doing? So Casper, you can just say.
You actually have a pretty nice link in the blog post. I just wanted to say that has a nice explanation.
So basically, whenever you were going to generate text from any of these models, this applies to OpenAI's model, but whatever other model like Llama and whatever. So you generate a bunch of tokens, and you have a bunch of techniques like top K and top P, etc. But whatever the temperature is doing is basically, if the temperature is very high, then probability of generating the next tokens are pretty much uniform. So you have a similar probability of generating whatever the next token is. But if the temperature is very low, then we funnel that probability into a single token. So the token, it's really like taking a list of words and soft maxing it in a way. So basically, if the temperature is really close to 0, then it's very it's going to hit that specific token number 1. If you extend the temperature, then if you have 10 different tokens, the probability is going to be equally distributed in terms of those. And of course, we can tweak the temperature and always make it 0, right? But that's the point of generative models, is that they have the generative capability, and the diversity of them is what gives them such a nice things. And especially in business contexts, where you have, like you said, John, as a human in the loop, you want to be able to give options rather than saying, hey, here's a generated thing. So of course, we could tune that. We could try to make it as deterministic as deterministic as possible. But the big advantage of these models is the fact that they're probabilistic and they are kind of creative, right? That's why we like them. And so
now
I would say,
understand what you're saying in this this part of it. I totally agree, and I think it's an excellent point that.
If you go so low, then
we don't want this non-creative.
Use seconds.
Yeah. That's such a great point. Yeah,
that's what I meant. But I normally we set those temperatures like we set random seeds, but we still see some variation in what's going on because you don't control the API, someone else does.
Yeah, exactly.
I find like when I'm tuning a classifier, like some prompt for a classifier, I find it very useful to keep the temperature at 0 because like most of the time it's the same. Like I haven't experienced yet that it's not this kind of like the same.
And have you also played around in OpenAI's interface? One of kind of my dirty secrets is that I also you can see the full spectrum of all the probabilities. So every token OpenAI generates, you can actually see the other tokens that it would likely generate after that word, and then you can really
interface?
see. So in the playgrounds.
In the playground,
If you turn on the full spectrum of probabilities, you actually are able to see which word would be more likely after another word given a certain word before. So you can also add that to your prompt, and we'll get into the prompt side of this blog post, but you can actually fine tune the prompt in the right direction really for that completion.
I didn't know that. That's new.
It's a little hack.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so so these things are like I really much agree. Like the useful thing about these large language models is really the stochastic nature of them because So how do you just maybe briefly I just want to hear your thoughts on like how to handle this, right? Do you see any kind of like please give me the answer, right? No, but do you see, because I think a lot of people is kind of like scratching their head thinking how are we going to kind of like handle this, right? And how we're going to make sure that it behaves and
So 2 parts, right? So the first part is if you're doing something that you really want something and you're trying to get your large language model to always predict the same thing, then make sure it's the right use case. Make sure you're interested in the generative aspect of things and you really want a sentence or something. Then in the large language models, and also like very popular technique that I've used, for example, is a use case where let's say I have a list of items, like a list of a lot of items that you can, let's give a more real use case. Let's say you're in the IKEA webpage and you want to configure a table to be exactly like you want it. And you have to click, I want this specific shade of wood, I want these specific chairs, I want this, I want whatever, right? And let's imagine a use case where I say, I want a table that looks like the mid-1950s. Then you would have to look at all of the configuration possibilities, right? And you would have the large language model look at your prompt, what type of like table you want, and it will have to output a JSON, right? A JSON of what those configurations are so you can visualize it on the web page. Now, in this very specific case, you don't want the model to be creative. You want the model to look at what the mood is or the description of the table is, and you want it to output just plain JSON. You don't want it to make up characteristics that are not specified. You want it to give very specific things. If it gives the wrong key, then you're not going to see it on the web page. And LLMs have some tools for this, like function calling, for example, where you can actually define a pydantic or a data class model for the Pythonistas out there, or some sort of JSON specification, literally a JSpec, if I got the name wrong, where you can specify my LLM should output this format exactly. And that will give you some... Go ahead.
You can actually also give it an enum where you can limit kind of like the string types, for example.
So you can define the dictionary. I would like you to output exactly this. And that helps,
very useful,
but that's still not perfect. I still have problems with that case. So it's still not perfect. And I have to do a lot of like logic around it to make up for whatever mess it does. And so I would say like there's these 2 techniques, but you also need to get comfortable with the stochastic nature, right? So put all the guardrails that you need to put around it. Make sure there's a human in the loop, like you, Jonas, said. I think these things are fantastic with a human in the loop. And in the case of emails that I talked before, the email was not sent. The email was generated for someone, and they could tweak it and send it. And that's really where I think these LLMs shine, is when they they make someone's job easier. They don't do it.
Yeah, they prepare the cake. We can eat it.
Exactly. Precisely.
Yeah.
So yeah.
They kind of like do 90% of the work, and then maybe you have to do the last 10.
Precisely, and also
maybe
makes
90%.
companies more comfortable, right? Like they're not putting anything out there that hasn't been double checked. But the double checking, like it's like when you're going to have a discussion. It's much easier if you have something to discuss about, because if you have a blank page, it's going to be hard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about the future, because you're talking about in the blog post that you were developing an application using the DaVinci 3 model. Kind of like the model that were available, like the best model that were available before the GPT 3.5 Turbo came out. And then, suddenly it was all about like this new chat protocol with messages and, what is that? And
there were some painful nights.
And GPT-4. And actually today where we were recording, I don't know if you noticed, but they have just announced that the chat GPT
multimodal.
Will kind of like start to accept the vision and it's just who knows what will happen, right? And who knows what will happen, in just a couple of months, right? Your code could just be broken or something, right?
Yeah.
I hope that they're doing what they can to kind of like So how do you kind of like make sure? How do you think about that when developing with these things?
That's a good point. So we were developing something focused. It was a very generative use case. It was generating emails, and it was all about generating them so that people like them, etc. And we all built this infrastructure in GPT-3, which was Text DaVinci 003, like you said, Casper, and was the original completions API, right? And then it was good and everything was working well. Then couple of weeks after literally like 3.5 comes out with a whole new API interface for completions. I was like, oh wow, okay, like I have to rewrite a bunch of this code. This is horrible. And then and to be honest, this is a classical software engineering pattern problem. Like it's the strategy pattern of you have certain interface and you have different strategies for the same interface. And that's like the side of the software engineer in me says like you are depending on an API that is a little bit unstable given the progress that is being made. So this is the time, and I hate saying this, to abstract things, which I hate. When I see an abstract class method, I always say like, why? But this was the time when I said, I will write a strategy pattern, which I have not said lots of times. I hate when we start, doing the software mumbo jumbo of abstracting everything. And talking about singletons. I really hate that. So this case was like, okay, I will implement a strategy pattern so that I have because we already had built basically a product around it, right? So you cannot just shift overnight, change all your prompts. Everything is now working. Now you have the system prompt as well. Like everything needs to change fast. And so I built kind of a pattern where I could adapt to whatever change went on. And we also stopped using the completions PyPI package and went straight for the API because we thought like things were easy to operate like there as well. And then, so the point here that I wanted to make is, and everything went well after, because they released GPT-4 after 2 weeks after or 1 month after or whatever. And we actually were able to adopt GPT-4 in a matter of like 3 or 4 hours. And that was in production. And the experience for the customers was like much better. Yeah. And the point here is know that these things are constantly moving. And that's very much of a software engineering principle, I believe, more than a machine learning one, where software engineers are used to dealing with APIs that change and interfaces that change. And so these interfaces will change. So make sure you can kind of change with it and make your life easier, but don't make it too easier. So don't start building abstract factory patterns after night. I'm not really a big advocate of that. I really like when they start going all out. I'm like, where do I change things? But so use the right side of software engineering. Remember, you're consuming an API. Software engineers have been doing this for years. So hopefully learn something from their side as well, because it will make your life easier, right?
That's a great point, both on the side that you shouldn't overdo design patterns all around your code just because you just learned how to do them. I mean, if anyone has read the design patterns book, which I highly recommend, I did read it. And I also started using design patterns a little bit more, and then I started deleting them again very much, because I used them mostly to learn the patterns and figure out when to use them, right? Because I knew that I wasn't supposed to use design patterns all over the place, just because I now knew a little bit about it, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's a very good point, and good to hear that the strategy pattern has not lived in vain. It was actually useful.
Like, I was so excited. But I was like, this is the case. This is the case.
Are you, Duarte, are you familiar with LangChain? Yeah. So that is basically one giant strategy pattern, right? Just with vector stores and LLMs.
I have opinions about the LangChain.
A lot of people do.
A lot.
That's another session.
Another session. Let's say prepare for the future. But if you're preparing for the future and your framework is also preparing for the future, then maybe reconsider.
Okay. So let's we have almost talked for an hour, but so let's jump further. So streaming versus batching. Can you explain what is that all about?
Yeah, so I'll make this one shorter and quicker. So my point is that we spend a lot of time building these products, and these products are amazing. So nobody likes clicking a button and then waiting 35 seconds. Have you ever clicked the button and waited 35 seconds without closing the tab? Because the first thing that I do if I'm looking, I'm closing. And so ChatGPT does this tremendously, right? Whenever you ask it something, ChatGPT, you see the thing complete as it goes by. A lot of the clones, internal ChatGPTs, completions, whatever, they've always used I have to wait 30 seconds for something to complete. So in every product that I built with GPT, I always make sure that the experience of the customer is pristine. And so that means that or you stream. They have a streaming capability in most of these APIs, and Fast API from Python also has a streaming response that you can use to consume these patterns. So stream and make things appear on screen as they are, or make a really, really nice waiting experience, which I don't know, like a video, something, you know what I mean?
Just like imagine ChatGPT
that elevator music.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like if you have to wait 35 seconds for it, it's not going to happen.
Just imagine ChatGPT without streaming.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be a really terrible
but how many Streamlit apps have you seen without streaming?
Yeah,
I've seen a lot. You know what I mean? And that's the point. I've built another more for fun, which is an AI cover letter generator site, and I spent 2 days building the website with GPT and OpenAI and everything. But I had to spend 4 days building the front end, just because I really wanted the streaming response to appear there and the experience to be consistent and nice. Because you spend all of this time, and then if we're machine learning engineers going to the front end, make sure that your experience is also nice. And so use streaming, because the moment customers see something on the screen that's when you get them. It's not waiting 35 seconds.
Yeah, nobody gets excited by watching a spinner for 35 seconds.
Hell no. I don't know. I've been some great spinners, but 35 seconds is a long time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And Fast API has tools for this, right? So Fast API, they have tools for streaming response, and there are tools in Python that you can use.
What about Streamlit? Is it just a little side note here? What is Streamlit? Is it because I've just recently started using a lot of Streamlit? So
there's some hacks. You need to do the page refresh with the tokens, but if you do a page refresh, you can actually in Streamlit you can actually fake also a streaming response. I've done it in a couple of prototypes.
Yeah, great. I would say that using Fast, for all those out there using Fast API and the OpenAI Python package. You have this stream parameter to an A create chat completion, and you can basically just async loop over it, and it's pretty easy to do with a WebSocket endpoint or something like that, even if you wanted to.
I think in Fast API you don't even need a WebSocket. If you're really just using the API, you can use API has a default streaming response from that they used in the. What's the name of the framework that they use? It's Starlet, I think. So Starlet has a streaming response, and you can basically yield from a function. So you yield from an API endpoint, and you'll see those things appear on the screen as is. Then however the front-end engineers integrate that's their problem. But you've done your part.
That's why I said WebSocket, because it kind of does have a little bit of control.
Yeah.
But you're right. You can do it very, very easy. and it feels a little bit magical, yeah, because you have that experience, and that's what they want, you know. They don't want to wait for like so long.
No, hell no.
I totally agree on this one.
Great. Finally, so we are closing in 5 minutes time or something like this, because we also have to respect your time, Duarte. But let's just talk about kind of like your last point in the blog post, which is like prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is hard. Just simple question. How do you feel about prompt engineering?
So yeah, I have a lot of feelings about prompt engineering, but I think it's this dark science that we all have been doing. And of course, there are tools like we talked, Casper, about like knowing what tokens are doing and everything. I tend to just version control my prompts because they're kind of the thing that you have most precious right now if you're using OpenAI is the API, is the prompts. Now, for the prompts, what I also one thing that I also need to say is that what I've done is imitate whatever the guys that have been doing prompts for years, so OpenAI, Azure, and all those done. So there's a bunch of leaks of Azure's Cortana or whatever prompts, the GPT prompts, the bar prompts, they all have leaked. And so these people have aligners and prompt engineers that have been working in these companies for years. So whatever techniques they're using, they're probably good places for you to start with. OpenAI also have some resources for you to kind of get inspired on. So read up a lot on that and do what the pros are doing, basically. But it's a lot of dark art, basically.
Yeah, it's a lot of like tips and tricks, and then if you do this, it's very useful, super useful. Yeah. How do you feel about prompt engineering?
It's broken. It's broken prematurely. You know what I mean? Like just knowing how there's some tools coming up, like prompt tools and things like that. But it's really hard to know that a small change will cause so much impact. And you can have all of these evals, right, as a way of you evaluating their prompts. But like I said, testing GPT 3.5 programmatically is just expensive.
Yeah.
It's
How do you feel about prompt engineering, Jonas?
Yeah, but I really feel like we need to have the Logits probe come out of the API and we need some more information, please. Because prop logs are just it's so hard to do anything without them. Yeah, I have so many ideas in my head of how I can draw graphs and we have this. We wanted to make semantic text splitter, like a semantic aware text splitting, because we need it for retrieval augmented generation. You want to split the text in appropriate places for you to embed and retrieve, blah 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 blah. Yeah, so we had an idea that if only we had log props, we could just draw that graph so you can see where the context is switching, because it's going to be reflected in the probability distribution. But you can't do tricks like that when you don't have the data. You only have the tokens coming out. It's so annoying, and I feel like there's something we need more.
We need some good tools, but I also think that there are probably already 25 different tools for doing prompt engineering. So maybe, like you're saying, Jonas, we need more information.
I don't know. It's so new for everybody. Yeah. So we're uncharted territory all the time.
For sure.
So maybe a last question. Do you think that it's worthwhile doing spending time adjusting your prompt? For sure. Is there something to kind of to gain from it?
So I think there's the first initial thing. So what happened for me in the past is in a lot of projects that I come up with an initial prompt, which is basically a list of instructions, because that's what Copilot, GitHub, all of those guys do. So a long list of instructions with some if loops in a Jinja template for some things to appear or not. Then that's the first goal, right? I would like to attain the business objective of we need this, and this set of instructions generates that. That's the first thing. And I think once you accomplish that and product managers or your customers enjoy what they are seeing, great. That's the first point. Then there's the part of like adding requirements. So, oh yeah, but now I would like it to only be 225 words. Now I would like it to be also taking into consideration this aspect. And you start adding to the instructions, right? And you add and you add and you add. Then there's the point where, okay, but what if I change the order of the instructions? There's something more than the other word. So I would feel like you need to spend time. There's for sure diminishing returns. It's like using Vim, you know what I mean? It's like you can automate it. It's nice, but there's a sure point where you're going too far and you should probably stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about finding that spot, right?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, maybe time box it, and then it's done.
Great. So we've been recording for an hour. So I'm thinking about maybe we would kind of like to end it here. But before we end, is there kind of like some final remarks or something you want to share? Duarte?
Yeah. So for me, it's first of all, thanks a lot for having me. I had a lot of fun with this discussion. I mean, I think I had a lot of fun. It was really, really nice. And in terms of the large language models, I would just incite you to, I think Jonas made this conclusion like 15 minutes into the podcast, which is like, this is not the hammer, in my opinion, it's not the hammer you were looking for. And it's a really large hammer. It solves a lot of nice problems, but know what problem you're trying to solve and be a little bit skeptical as always. And I'm also a big proponent of starting simple. Now, if starting simple can mean using a large language model, but yeah, just don't use it like a hammer for everything. There's a lot of things that came up over the years that are really simple and easier to control and cheaper and faster that you can also leverage. But when you find that price use case, I mean, LLMs are really an incredible tool. So yeah, have fun, basically.
Yeah.
Wow, what a great note to end on.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, but thank you so much for joining, Duarte, and pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
See you out there, everybody who's listening.
Bye.